Hello and welcome back to Bigfoot Lake. Tonight we have two Bigfoot encounters. The first one being a short encounter from the state of Tennessee, and the second one a longer encounter from the state of Florida. So with that being said, pull up a stump and get comfortable as we dive into our first encounter from the state of Tennessee. When I was a child, my family and I went to a national park in Tennessee. Dad and I were walking a trail and enjoying the scenery. That's when about halfway through the trail we started hearing noises and such, like some weird grunts and some trees getting hit. My dad told me it was probably some deer fighting because sometimes it can sound like that. So I didn't get worried, and he and I kept walking down the trail. Well, we get to a point where Dad was always holding my hand because I was a scared little kid, so what else can you do? That's when we saw it. A reddish brown Sasquatch. It walked right in front of Dad and me. I remember Dad put me behind him, and as this Sasquatch walked across the trail, he looked at us. And my dad's a bigger guy, being about 6'6" and being around 275 pounds at the time. This thing was much bigger than him. It was about 7 to 7.5 feet tall. I asked Dad years later why he didn't tell a ranger or anyone, and he said no one would have believed us. And hell, I don't care if someone does. I'm just sharing to see what you all think. Dad and I do have a lot of Native American heritage too, so I don't know if that means anything. So that concludes our first encounter from Tennessee. Fascinating encounter of a father and a son. So let me know what you think of that one. So we move to our second encounter, traveling to the state of Florida. I am 45, but this happened when I was 15, back in 1993. We had just moved to an area called Wekiva Springs, and our house was built brand new and was on the edge of a state park, Wekiva Springs State Park. It was still wild enough at that time that we could only take the trash out 30 minutes before the truck came due to the black bears that still ventured into the neighborhood. Deer population off the charts, and to this day you will see dozens throughout the day randomly in the neighborhood. Wild turkey, wild pig, bobcats, you name it. Our home sat perfectly on the one lake in the area, and as I said just months prior, the lot was just woods. At that time we did not have any neighbors or houses to our left or right, although the front of the neighborhood had been built out 20 years prior. At that time I had heard of Bigfoot, but by no means was it a daily thought or even in my interests. When I would get home from school, I would walk back into the woods, maybe 1,000 yards, and explore. And one day, I noticed a spot to plant a pot plant. I had just gotten into smoking a joint here and there, and had the bright idea of trying to grow my own plant. I became very familiar with the square mile around my home, and grew quite comfortable venturing out there sometimes, returning at dusk. One day, while going to check on my failed project of growing a marijuana plant, I saw my younger brother, who was 11, exiting the patio door about 50 yards behind me. I wasn't entering the woods yet, but I saw he was trying to sneak and follow me back there. I decided to play along and acted like I didn't know he was following me. As I was walking, I would hear him occasionally behind me, and I would stop suddenly just to make sure. As I got deeper into the woods, I noticed it was much calmer than normal. Keep in mind, I had been going back here 5 times a week for a couple of months at this point. There was not much else to do. I didn't see any deer nor squirrels, and in hindsight, there weren't even any wind or birds. I remember this well because I could hear my brother surprisingly well, almost too much so. I thought it would be funny if I turned the prank around on him and hide behind a tree and jump out and scare him when he passes by. It had been about 5 minutes of walking back, and we were deep enough in to really scare him. I found my tree and I stopped all movement and I waited. I figure he was only about 45 seconds or so behind. As I waited, I realized now there was no sound, almost as if I had earplugs in, but this meant nothing to me at the time, other than an observation. I heard my brother getting close and didn't realize how loud he was. He must be only 20 feet back around the turn. Any second I will see him. Except I never did. The footsteps suddenly stopped, and now I was in the weird position of just sitting there behind the tree. 2 minutes passed, and now I was getting curious. What the hell happened to him? Or did he just realize what I was doing and was going to scare me? I finally decided to take a look. I went around the corner and could see back a good ways. I saw nothing, which was impossible because I had heard him following me the whole time and didn't hear anything after I got behind the tree, which meant he literally disappeared. The woods were now suddenly creepy, and I got a very anxious feeling, the first time ever that day. My head said to head home, but for some reason I couldn't seem to get my bearings. I literally was lost. I calmed down and figured out the way back onto the trail, even though I never left it. It was like my equilibrium was off. At this point, my younger brother was nowhere to be seen, and I was genuinely concerned, considering he was just a few feet behind me a few minutes prior. I was yelling his name and started jogging back towards the direction of my home. After a couple minutes, I finally heard his voice. He was hiding under some palmetto leaves that he had laid across his body off the side of the trail. He was just laying there on the ground. I didn't know what to think, but I said, get up right now, and still have that weird feeling that I've had for the last 5 minutes. He got up, and I asked him what was happening, what was going on. And he just said, "Please, just run to the house with me." I didn't ask questions and ran back with him. Once we got to the backyard, he said that he had been following me, but when all of a sudden he smelled something horrible and looked to his left, and he saw a big, black, hairy person or thing. Me, being a little paranoid because I was illegally growing a pot plant, said, "What was it, a cop? What do you mean?" He repeated that it was a big person with hair all over them, and it scared him so badly that he just fell to the ground and rolled into the palmetto bushes and just sat there frozen until I found him. At that moment, we heard a loud bang, 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 and a weird scream from the woods behind us. We both looked, and sure enough, hanging from a tree about 50 yards behind us and swinging from a large branch was the thing he was talking about. If I didn't know better, it looked like a human being mimicking a large monkey swinging from a branch. It just made no sense and was completely out of place. Clear as day, this was a large burly thing that looked more like a person than anything else. We both sat there not knowing what to do. The thing swung off the branch into the woods and was out of sight, but was hollering the whole time. We immediately ran all the way to the house, yelling for Mom and Dad to tell them what we saw. At first, we got the whole, oh, it was just a bear. It was a bear. But eventually later that night, I think they realized we were serious. And the next day, my dad was able to find a report that in Florida, there were encounters with something called a skunk ape. Over the next 5 years, I would continue to have run-ins with this thing. And 2 times, we had a deer leg and a deer skull put in our backyard. Once, I had turkey feathers put on my windowsill. I didn't know anything about what that meant, and only later as I researched the subject did I learn about that. Every 6 months or so, the park rangers would have to come to our home and put a barrel in our yard with a donut to capture the black bears that were too comfortable coming to the neighborhood. After seeing the same ranger for the 3rd time, I felt comfortable enough to ask him what he did with the bears once he got them. He said that they moved them deep into the deeper parts of the park or altogether relocate them in extreme cases, and said, but that's not what you need to worry about. I asked him what he meant, and he just said that there were things bigger and badder than bears out in the woods, and to always be careful. I remember that to this day, and kind of understood what he meant after having had that experience, and knowing that there was indeed something else out in those woods behind my home. Today, my parents still live in that same home, and I go visit from time to time. My dad, being retired, has nothing but time, and it's actually grown to be a believer himself, and over the years has a few experiences of his own, including orbs. The house is about 15 minutes from downtown Orlando, but in an area that is surprisingly untouched by humans. As I said, it's a protected state park, and the home is right on the edge where the park begins. I think when the home was built, we probably disturbed where this thing was staying, or its general area. And then its more homes were built and got pushed further back, but at that time was still coming in fairly close. It's not a crazy, insane encounter or dangerous or thrilling, but nonetheless, it was real. I saw with my own eyes, and then had follow-up experiences. So now, I'm just trying to learn all about these things. Like, for example, was a skunk ape different than a standard quote-unquote Bigfoot? Is it the same? I don't know, but I look forward to going down the rabbit hole to find the answers. So that concludes our second encounter, that one from the state of Florida. And as most of you probably know, Florida is well known for its skunk ape encounters. One thing I found rather fascinating was the location where they first saw this creature. It was in the trees. Have you heard other encounters of Bigfoot, skunk ape, or any other creatures like this? Bipedal creatures in the trees. If so, I would love to hear your thoughts and have your comments on that. Please reach out and let me know. And Let me know what you thought overall about the first encounter in Tennessee with the father and son. I personally found that one hit kind of close to home because I can just picture this young kid standing behind his dad and peeking out around the side to see this 7.5 feet tall Bigfoot. That story stuck with him throughout his life. So let me know what you think about that one in Tennessee, and certainly what you thought about the encounter in Florida that we just read. So I appreciate your time and for spending some time with us here at Bigfoot Lake. Hope you all have a great night, and as always, we will see you on the next one.